was in Poland when it really hit. I was a part of a service learning team with students from Milligan and Malone University. We were spending our spring break in Sosnowiec, assisting a local church and learning about Polish culture. We should have brought back stories about the friends we made, the food we ate, and the historic landmarks we visited. We should have been telling everyone about the famous Krakow cloth market or our somber trip to Auschwitz. But instead, there was COVID. We still had all of those stories, of course, but as the shadow of the pandemic grew, it slowly began to change the end of our Poland story. March 14th was the tipping point. Around 6 that evening, we found out that Milligan was going to extend spring break, and then we'd go online for a few weeks. We were thrilled. We had been traveling for nearly 2 weeks, and none of us had been looking forward to hitting the ground running as soon as we got back to the States. If we knew then what we know now, we probably wouldn't have celebrated, though. A few hours after finding out about our extended spring break, we were told that President Trump had announced that all international air traffic was going to stop, and it was going to stop the morning we were supposed to fly home. Our leaders told us that our travel agent had been on the phone all day trying to get us a flight that left Friday instead of Saturday, and that she had successfully been able to get half of us a flight. Us Milligan students were headed home, but the Malone students hadn't been so lucky. They also told us that in order to make this flight, we were going to have to leave at 2 a.m., which meant if we fell asleep immediately, we'd get less than 3 hours of sleep. That meeting was a lot to take in. It would have been a shock in the best of worlds, but we had all been really disconnected from the state of the world during our trip. And we must have been like a microcosm of the rest of the world, because we all reacted differently. Some panicked, reaching out to friends and family a world away. Some joked, trying to lighten the mood. Others just ignored the way that COVID had entered our lives and plans. For me, there was a sort of peace that came. It was like a shield that protected me from the uncertainty of the situation. It was really a gift from God. I also trusted our leaders. I knew they would do whatever it took to get us home. One leader specifically said that she would paddle us across the Atlantic if she had to. She was joking, but honestly, if it came to it, I'm pretty sure she would have. After that, we all started throwing out crazy ideas about how we could get home. My favorite was that we'd fly to Canada, and then we'd steal a bus, and then smuggle ourselves across the border, and then road trip it back to Tennessee. Ultimately, our travels were not going to include grand auto theft, but it was going to include getting up at an ungodly hour. After a very short nap, we piled into swarms of taxis and headed to the airport. But getting on American soil wasn't our only concern. We were spending all day trying to figure out how long we'd have to quarantine and if we'd have to quarantine at the airport, which would be a really weird kind of camping trip. One well-intentioned family member even sent us a news article about how we'd all be moved to California to quarantine, because the students coming home from Tennessee and Ohio should definitely go to the West Coast and share our germs there. But the family member meant well. It just didn't help the panickers in our group not panic. We also made local news. A Johnson City news station reported that we were all trapped in Poland for the rest of March. Who knew? Specifically not us, who were actively in the process of leaving Poland. But it did lighten our spirits to laugh at how much more the news knew about our personal lives than we did. When we made it to the airport, Operation Get the Malone Team Back to Ohio began in earnest. After a very long conversation with the ticket agent, our leaders told us that we'd all be on the same flight to Munich, Germany, and then we'd be able to part ways and head home. The rest of that day was a blur. I was falling asleep everywhere, and I really do mean everywhere. The blur included a long layover in Germany and a struggle to find food because the lady at the only restaurant in the terminal I could eat at naturally spoke German. I do not speak German, so we had a really hard time getting my order in. But after that, we flew back to the States. And during all of that, we flew, and then there was a struggle with customs because they kept on asking us if we'd been to China, if we'd thought about China, if we'd eaten Chinese food, really anything China related. But we got through. And I saw my dad waiting for me. And at that moment, I knew I was home. Yes, I was not quite home yet. I still had to go to Milligan and pick up my things, which had been helpfully but pitifully left in a pile of cardboard boxes in the middle of the parking lot. COVID restrictions barred us from entering the dorms. We understood it. It made sense, but it was really hard for our tired and stressed brains to convince our hearts not to feel a little hurt by the sad pile of boxes and the locked doors between what had been our rooms for nearly a year. But we gathered our things, and my dad and I headed back home to Southwest Virginia. We spent the next 2 weeks in quarantine at my grandmother's house, and she went and stayed with the rest of my family. I saw them briefly from over 6 feet away, but I didn't get to see them much. I mostly spent those 2 weeks processing and sleeping. I think I still am processing it, but I don't regret it. How could you regret something that amazing? Yes, COVID made an unwelcome appearance, a surprise ending to my Poland story, but I don't regret it. Even those long 2 weeks in quarantine, because it didn't matter to me. When I saw my dad waiting for me at the airport, I was already home.
I have no idea how much 6 feet actually is, so I just pretend there's a buffalo in between us.
I doubt the start of COVID was easy for anyone, but things were even more unsettled for me and my family because my mother is a nurse practitioner, so she was on the front lines fighting the pandemic. She nursed COVID patients and has come face to face with positive patients quite a few times. Not only was there a fear of her getting it, but there was also the fear of her spreading it to us. Thankfully, we've been really lucky so far. Like all medical professionals, my mom and her fellow nurses have done their best to make sure that they are protected. As we began to come to terms with this new reality, I began trying to look on the brighter side of things. Quarantine gave me time that I hadn't had before. An opportunity to focus on things that I just wasn't able to fit in my schedule. One of these was my art. As a music minor, it's probably no surprise that music is a pretty big part of my life. So I dug out old songs and finally found the time to improve them. I also took requests from friends, family members, and people on social media. They gave me songs to cover, such as Believer, Grand Night for Singing, Have You Ever Seen the Rain, and Somebody to Love. It was an eclectic mix. And I got better, both vocally and on piano. I've always wanted to do more than just pluck at the keys, but who has the time? Suddenly, I did. So I devoted myself to studying chords and practicing. I might not be playing Carnegie Hall anytime soon, but I can play along with what I'm singing, and I'd call that a success. I was able to share this success on social media, which is a pretty big part of my life. I know, it sounds a bit shallow, but it's true. Like many performers, I have this dream of fame. Nowadays, that takes a lot more than just talent. It takes reach, and reach comes from social media. As much as I love social media, it became kind of like a job. I had to keep up a constant stream of posts and cover songs. It was pretty tedious. But I did gain a pretty big following. While I might not be TikTok famous, I did build up a following there and on Instagram. This all made quarantine just a bit less dreadful. Another good thing that came out of quarantine was my physical health. I was able to drop a few pounds. The quarantine gifted me enough time not only to work on my music, but to work out. The weight loss didn't just come from weights and cardio, though. Let's just say I haven't always been the best eater. I'm more of what you would call a convenience eater, just grabbing whatever was the quickest. So during the quarantine, I took the time I'd been given to choose better. I was making protein smoothies, cutting back on carbs and watching my calories, and generally just eating real food. I even completely cut soda out of my diet. Out of all of it. I have to say, it was the soda that probably was going to make me give in, if anything. It was like I was having caffeine withdrawals. and I had to go to Soda Addicts Anonymous. Hi, I'm Joey, and I'm addicted to Dr. Pepper. Eventually, I completely got rid of it and cut it out of my diet. I haven't had a Dr. Pepper since. These personal triumphs have all helped to make a dark time seem just a bit better, a bit lighter. It's not necessarily ignoring the hard realities of life during a pandemic. But it's trying to find the positive or creative new opportunities. There is enough gloom and darkness to go around. You can either sit in it or try to conjure up just a bit of light and reason to celebrate. It could be making someone smile, kicking your soda habit, or just sharing a song with the world.
How was I helpful? I picked up Nana's groceries.
We sewed what seemed like hundreds of masks for frontline workers.
Well, we did one of those birthday parade things for a friend of mine. It was crazy.
Sold my body for science. You know, the vaccine trial.
As an introvert, a summer quarantine sounded like paradise. I could binge TV, pursue creative passions, read every book on my shelf. All the things I yearned to do during the horrid quarantine semester with its rocky shift to online learning. Summer wouldn't be all me time though, since I still needed money. The plan was to babysit. It was all worked out. After I finished school, my sister and I would babysit for this woman as she started a new job. It didn't pay a lot, but enough. This also left me plenty of free time to enjoy the summer, as much as one could in the midst of a pandemic. Then the woman lost her job, and thus, so did I. However, quarantine or not, I still needed to make money over the summer. That's one of the facts of life for a college student. Thankfully, growing up in a military family prepared me for sudden changes like this. So I applied at multiple restaurants and coffee shops. I knew they were open because of DoorDash, and I knew they must have needed employees in the midst of a pandemic. One of the restaurants called me back the day after I applied. I had an interview the day after that, and my first day on the job was a week after that. Needless to say, they were desperate. However, this worked out in my favor. They gave me the flexible scheduled pay rate instead of the normal one, even though I asked for Sunday mornings off. Perhaps they were impressed at my perfectionism. When prepping for the interview, I broke out every trick I'd ever learned about job interviews. I wore a blazer, ensured I had all the required documents, and printed off a resume. They didn't even need the resume, though. In fact, none of my preparation was necessary at all. My peers at job orientation showed up in tank tops and shorts, neglected to fill out the required forms, and forgot their social security cards. My type A brain could barely fathom this, but they were hired just like me. Again, management was desperate. I started out on front counter, a place of many interesting experiences. Like the man who got mad when I wouldn't give him quarters for his dollar since I was out of quarters. Everyone was out of quarters. But he didn't believe there was a national coin shortage. Or the woman who told me a pandemic is no reason to not allow refills. It is a reason, ma'am, whether or not you agree with it. Thankfully, my sojourn at front counter was short-lived, and I quickly became trained in drive-thru handout. Turned out I was good in drive-thru because I soon worked in no other position. I'd walk in and the manager would tell me, "Abigail, you know where to go, honey." But don't let anyone tell you fast food is easy. After a shift, I'd always be exhausted. When I got home, I usually curled up in a blanket and watched a movie, or played games with my siblings, or, if I wasn't entirely dead, I'd fix myself a cup of coffee, sit at my desk, and write. It wasn't exactly my introverted dream summer of reading, writing, and making music, but money ergo, the necessity of being the girl at the drive-thru. But surprisingly, I didn't hate working there. Everyone talks smack about fast food, saying that working there's the lowest of jobs, but it isn't bad. I got free meals every time I worked, sometimes free ice cream, and I could always grab a coffee after work. Sure, waking up at 4:30 for morning shifts isn't ideal, but personally, I'd take a morning shift over a midnight one any day. But more than the ice cream or the coffee, although the ice cream was pretty good, I was so grateful to get that job. Yes, I would have preferred to spend the summer locked in my room, but this job meant paying off part of my tuition. Yes, working in a place that smells like French fries isn't ideal, but at least I got to eat the fries. And yes, some people were rude about the fact that we didn't allow refills or make magically non-existent quarters exist. Some complained that the dining room was no longer open 24/7. Some didn't wear masks. But others were careful to follow the guidelines, which I very much appreciated. Some even tipped me. One person bought a $1 coffee, paid with a 20, and told me to keep the change. So it turned out, working in a pandemic, even fast food, wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be.
You know, we definitely learned a few things during lockdown. We basically became Little House on the Prairie. We learned how to bake bread, can our own pickles, and make our own soap.
I have developed a deep personal relationship with Netflix.
We tended our garden, rendered lard. What else did we do? Oh, yes. We made our own sweet tea. Yes, we learned how to play the fiddle. We learned how to use the griddle.
What did you do while at home? Ever since our return to Milligan after COVID hit, I've been asked this question thousands of times, and I've answered it a lot. I wasn't home at all. I'm not from here. My family and I grew up in Miami, Florida. Since I was a child, South Florida was all I knew. From overpopulated beaches to fancy museums to huge skyscrapers, that is what defined South Florida to me. I grew up in a Puerto Rican household, an Afro-Caribbean church, and a primarily Cuban school. Everywhere I went in Miami, I learned and adapted to the culture around me. Now, of course, Miami isn't all about the glitz and glamours that shows like Miami Vice, CSI Miami, or Dexter make it out to be. But Miami was mine, and that's what made it so great. But it wasn't going to stay mine. In my junior year of high school, my dad and my sister moved to Tennessee, while my mom and I stayed in Miami for an extra year, so I could finish my last year of high school and she could finish her last year of work. I didn't want to leave, but I knew I would have to. Tennessee was just too different, and I've never been fond of different. I could see it already, moving from a quaint subdivision in my hometown to the middle of nowhere in a state I barely even knew. Of course, it didn't end up that way. My parents moved 30 minutes outside of Gatlinburg in the Smoky Mountains, and I moved to Johnson City from Milligan, of course, but still, I couldn't quite call this place home. It was too different. I was too different. We still have our house in Miami. It's empty since we've moved all our things to Tennessee, but it's ours. My parents are just now on the verge of selling it, and my heart goes sad thinking of another family walking through the same doors that I took my first steps. But I was able to say my final goodbye to Miami during spring break last semester. I thought about all the friends and family that I wanted so badly to be reunited with. I called them all up and said, "Free up your whole week. I'm going home." Home. The warmest word in the dictionary. I packed up all my things, making it a point to leave behind all my winter coats, and I headed south. When I got there, it was as if nothing had changed. My Hispanic culture was thriving. There was music in the streets, cars everywhere. It was just as I left it. I felt like I was right where I belonged, and wondered if leaving was even the right choice. A week later, COVID-19 slithered its way into South Florida, and everyone panicked. Stores were barricaded. There were no cars in the streets, no music by my favorite panaderia. For the first time in my life, I saw Miami like I never had before. Quiet. The only life that was seen were the riots that ran rampant through downtown. The only sounds in the city were the cries of social unrest. For the first time, home didn't feel warm. We were in the process of selling our childhood home, right when Florida shut its borders. For 2 months, I stayed in an unfurnished house, sleeping on the only couch we had left. The emptiness reminded me that I couldn't live here anymore. Quarantine changed my definition of home. Home was empty. To put it mildly, COVID-19 was one of the most trying times of my life, but also some of the most formative. In the empty, quiet chaos of my hometown, I found God in the silent storm. I talked with him every day, finally finding time to sit and read the word or write. God revealed to me, during the uncomfortable, my true character, to mold me in the waiting and remind me why I left. It was at the end of quarantine that God reminded me of my calling to the Tri-Cities area. And so, I left to Tennessee with a somber happiness. I left knowing that I had outgrown my beloved Miami. But I left with a new hope that I hadn't felt in a long time. Things would get better once I got to my new home. COVID has caused so many problems in my life, and it's completely changed the way I live. But it's given me an appreciation unlike nothing else. It's given me an appreciation for my family who stuck with me through it all. An appreciation for weekly check-ins from friends via phone call or Zoom. It gave me an appreciation for letters from loved ones that found their way into my mailbox. COVID has caused so many problems and has completely changed my way of life. But it's given me an appreciation unlike nothing else. It's given me an appreciation for my family who stuck with me through it all. An appreciation from weekly check-ins from friends via phone call or Zoom. An appreciation for letters from loved ones that found their way into my mailbox. But most of all, it made me fall in love with Tennessee all over again. It was during that trying time of my life that I realized that I could make myself a new home in Johnson City. So what did I do during quarantine? I found myself. I found my purpose. I found my home.
Just woke up, so it's time to take my temperature. Alright, the app says that I'm allowed to be on campus today, so that means it's time to get up. So today I got my breakfast to go, which is one nice thing about the pandemic, is that I can now get my food to go and bring it upstairs to do homework before my classes. So that's pretty cool. Before I start my Zoom meeting, then I make sure I have my coffee, and I have all the books that I need, all my pencils. There's my microphone, and I'm ready to go.
10, 9, 8. The clock ticked closer to a new year. I just hope there was no death, cheating, lies. Well, I didn't hope. I prayed. 2020 was around the corner, and I couldn't wait. I just graduated high school early so I could get a jump start on college. See, I thought online learning would be easy. So I did my senior year online. Big mistake. I thrive off of social interaction. I learn from having conversations. I'm a people person. And online, well, as I said, big mistake. With 2019 in the rearview mirror, I could start anew at community college. You see, 2019 was the worst year a person could ever ask for. I lost a lot, but what I gained was even worse. A new friend, you could say. Depression. But I wasn't going to pay mind to this new member of my life. Out with the old, in with the new, as they always say. This friend of mine had no place in my 2020. 7, 6, 5. Well, it was about 3 months into the new year, and everything seemed like it was starting to get back to normal. One night, a few friends and I had a party, food, games, that sort of thing. Then all of a sudden, our phones buzzed. NBA season canceled. That was weird. But we kept on with our activities. Then our phones kept buzzing. NASCAR, Major League Baseball. What was going on? So we flipped on the TV to see our president delivering a speech about a virus? I asked my friend, like the flu, because that seemed to be what it seemed like at the time. We kept watching, and it was more and more obvious what was about to happen. A lockdown. That moment, a buzz of energy hit me. Self-isolation. I just got done with that. I have to do it all over again. So, it seemed like my unwanted guest had returned. Or did he ever leave to begin with? The lockdown started and, stayed home. What's so bad with that? A few video games, some I haven't played ever, some I haven't played in a long time. There's a few shows my friends want me to watch. Shouldn't be that bad. There was him. I could look over and see him just sitting in the chair, so dark and empty. A predator ready to strike. And I had a bad feeling that I was the prey. 4, 3, 2. As the weeks turned into months, he was still just sitting there. He was still in the chair, but it felt like he was getting closer, inch by inch, slowly. But surely, I could see in his eyes. There was nothing. There weren't even really blacks, just a void. I tried to ignore him. I would play my video games and watch my shows, just trying to get him to leave. He never really moved any, so I thought if I would leave my room, he wouldn't follow me. So I went to watch a movie with Mom and Dad. Calm, peace, happiness. But then I looked in the hall. There he was, following me. He stood there at the end of the hall, so tall and crooked. Why didn't he leave? In those last few minutes of 2019, I thought I threw him out. I thought it was my home, but it was becoming more and more clear that it was probably his home. 1, he was driving me absolutely insane. I couldn't focus on anything. I was getting so tired. I just wanted to sleep. I couldn't sleep. He kept getting closer and closer to my bed every night. I just wanted to die. I wanted the pain all over. 2020 was going to be my year. It was my life, but it seemed to have become his. I missed my friends, the ones with smiles and laughs, but my teachers interacting with me and actually teaching me things. Easter, summer, the pool, flea markets, parties, camping, beaches, roller coasters. I missed my life. I missed living for me and not for him. Happy New Year! There's nothing magical about the start of a new year. Just a flip of a calendar, a change of the clock. 2020, just more of 2019. But I knew for a fact, in retrospect, as I tell you this story today, everything that has happened, everything that will happen, all of that will be okay. This unwanted guest may stare at me and drive me insane and push me to the absolute edge, but this is my home and this is my life. He has no power over me and he has no power over you. I made it through 2019 and this year is no different. 2021, I can't wait to see you. But 2020, you can't all be bad. I'll go to university. I'll wear a mask. I'll make new friends, maybe get a girlfriend. Who knows? But I'm gonna live my life. Depression has no more power. I'll watch all the sports that I can. I'll grow in my faith in God, and He will just become a forgotten memory. He never ever really had power over me. I just let him. So he doesn't have power over me anymore in my life. Because he is the worthless creature, not me. He's tortured too many souls. He's taken too many too soon with the lie that you are useless. You can get through this. You can survive the unwanted guest no matter how long he looms in the corner. All you have to do, all you have to say is, this is my home and you can get out.
I think everyone thought that 2020 would bring back the roaring 20s with parties, new trends, and all sorts of fun. Turns out we were about 2 years off, and it was a lot more like 1918 than 1920. No hanging out with friends at the pool, no vacation, no summer blockbusters, no parties. We had to separate. Some adjusted to our cloistered way of life better than others, though. It was the responsible thing to do, to separate ourselves. But staying alone isn't good for us. Others can bring out the best in us and make us better versions of ourselves. But with lockdowns, that wasn't really an option anymore. As the weeks of quarantine turns into months, I saw how people sunk into deeper depressive states, and that couldn't be me. So I decided to make something better. I couldn't fix the world, but I could make things look up in my own life. So I climbed out of my hole and decided I had to find something, anything, to make better, no matter what was going on around me. I chose to improve my environment. A little bit of background to my story. My room is pink. Not coral, not peach, not even a taffy or bubblegum pink. No, it's Pepto-Bismol pink, and I hate it. I've hardly ever spent any time in that room because it never felt like mine. When my friends would come over, we would spend time outside or in the living room, but never in my room. And as the days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, I grew increasingly annoyed at that Pepto-Bismol room, and I decided that something had to change. I needed to live in a place that was an extension of me, and a place that made me happy. Luckily, I had an option. In our house, there's a Florida room. It has white brick walls and a wooden ceiling and 2 walls of windows. I convinced my mom somehow that this needed to become my room. So I deep cleaned it, and then my dad and brother helped me move in furniture. I'd always wanted a canopy bed, so I bought one and then built it all by myself. I was very pleased. Billowy shears run around it, and it's so dreamy and aesthetic. The rest of the furniture I already had. Picture this: a vintage dresser with a mirror, a high-back rose-colored armchair, and a vintage display case with a desk. The display case is home to all of my vintage collections: hats, books, and cameras. The top shelf of the display case houses all of my typewriters. Basically, my room is a museum. The new room does have one major flaw, though. It doesn't have a door. I'm pretty sure that when the house was built back in the 1960s, no one thought that a college student would be at home during a pandemic and look at the room and think, bedroom. I'm pretty sure, in fact, that it was a screened-in porch before it got bricked in. So that leaves me with a 7-foot hole in the wall. It's a problem, but it's one that I solved with a gold-colored tapestry doorway. It's beautiful and very aesthetically pleasing. It gives a bit of privacy as well. Walking into my room suddenly feels like some boho, hippie, vintage paradise. my room. It finally feels like I can say that. Of course, by the time I'd settled back into life at home, it was time to go back to school. This year was different in so many ways. My first year of actually going away to school, I was running away from a lot of things, and I was so desperate to go. But this year, most of those things were gone, and I had my perfect room. If it wasn't for my friends here, I probably wouldn't have come back to Milligan this fall. But the moment I got on campus, all of those misgivings vanished. I got the key to my old dorm room, walked in, and memories just washed over me. Late night roommate talks, bemoaning humanities exams, TV marathons, and laughing at the stupidest things. I was so excited to be back. It's not my super aesthetically pleasing room back home. The paint in the dorm is bubbled and cracked. Not all of the tiles match. The furniture was definitely intended for slightly larger rooms. And the showers require contortions if you want to shave your legs. No vintage typewriters, dreamy canopy beds, or museum vibes. But it does have an actual door. I've grown so much in that little room on the second floor of Sutton, and as long as I'm at Milligan, it will be my home away from home.
I am now proficient in the air high five and elbow bump as a form of greeting.
My mother did the most southern thing ever. She broke quarantine to get sweet tea.
This is a weird time, so sometimes things get a little strange. Like, I realized that I've compensated for lack of human interaction with plants. It's becoming a problem.
I still remember asking a professor if the school was going to close down. It seems crazy now, but the words were tinged with skepticism. I thought the virus would remain contained in the US, like Ebola or H1N1, a scare and nothing more. I could hardly have imagined that in 3 months I would be asking not if we would close down, but would we reopen. Shortly after I asked this question, spring break began. When I showed up to work, I was met with a series of new protocols and a wave of rumors that universities, colleges, high schools, and even elementary schools would be closing their doors and moving classes online. Then the news broke that the NBA had halted its season due to a positive test. I could never have imagined that we would end up where we are today, but for the first time, the pandemic really touched my life. No more basketball. Then classes were moved online. And the restaurant where I waited tables at closed its doors, not for a couple weeks, but what would be for nearly 2 months. My life, along with everyone else's, changed dramatically. My father's office in Pittsburgh was shuttered, the Dairy Queen where my girlfriend worked closed its lobby, and as I walked into a movie theater, I was informed by the employees that the company had made the decision to close its locations across the nation. I still don't know when they'll be back. My friends and family were sent home from college, my grandparents hunkered down, the entirety of the nation stood still, and in many ways is still waiting to venture back out and for life to resume as normal. The most incredible aspect of this entire experience is the speed at which the closures occurred. In less than 2 weeks, the entire nation ground to a halt. And while we're beginning to make forward progress, I will never forget just how quickly it can be halted. As a biochemistry student, this pandemic is more than merely an interruption of my daily life. It has made the concepts that I've been learning over the last 3 years very relevant. Maybe a little more relevant than I would have liked. When articles about COVID were assigned as part of my organic chemistry class, I began to see how the principles I had been learning applied not only to others, but to me as well. I was no longer reading about a distant plague long defeated or a vaccine discovered many years ago. I was reading about a medical unknown, a novel virus, and the fight to combat rising cases. It's a pattern that has repeated itself throughout history. Influenza, yellow fever, tuberculosis, and now COVID-19. This scientific discovery offers me a form of fascination, but others are skeptical of its validity. I will never fault someone for asking questions. In fact, I believe the basis of science is logical skepticism. In other words, in science, we learn things by asking questions. The key to this, however, is that such questions must be based in reality. Furthermore, the individual asking the questions must be doing so in an honest manner and willing to accept a reasonable answer. Skepticism with a goal of learning is healthy. Skepticism with a goal of skepticism is disastrous. Unfortunately, our click-obsessed culture rewards the latter and has no time for the former. We've been learning in my chemistry capstone course this semester that individuals are biased towards a simple explanation. COVID-19 has underlined the truth in this statement. The search for easy answers has led many to unfounded conclusions about the virus. It doesn't help that the science is unsettled. It's called a novel coronavirus for a reason. But still, this misinformation has left me with the question, where does this leave me? When do I say something? At what point does a statement become so outrageous that it demands a rebuttal? Would it be better to change the subject and say nothing? This entire experience has raised so many more problems than the annoyance of masks or the need to sanitize all of the things, as the checklist at work so eloquently puts it. It's asked us to question just exactly how rational we are and forced us to ask tough questions of ourselves and others. But it's also given us the opportunity to do something with these revelations. And hopefully, when this is another chapter in the history books, it will record far more than the discovery of a vaccine or mere scientific advance. Hopefully, it will give us some answers to these tough questions.
When COVID-19 reached America, I didn't know how to react. Everyone thought it was just another sickness that would be dealt with, or rather hoped, but the numbers of cases kept rising and eventually the nation went into lockdown. An uproar over regulations erupted, conspiracy theories abounded, and preventive actions were debated. It was hard for everyone to be locked inside their own homes. And on top of that, I was kept from worshiping with my congregation, and that really hurt. I love those people so much, and I wanted to worship God with them, but I couldn't. No one could. It was hard to stay there, locked in my home, not being able to go out and visit with people, not being able to see them, not being able to worship with them, and I didn't really know how to feel, or how to react, or even how to express myself. And I'm an extreme extrovert, so being isolated from my friends, it cut deep. When I wasn't able to visit with my friends, and one by one, every Bible camp I wanted to go to was slowly and eventually canceled. And in all of this, I realized that home wasn't what I thought it was. My physical home, the house I lived in, became little more than a warm shelter. Worse, it began to feel like a prison. I was in isolation, incarcerated, if you will, inside of my own home. I hated that feeling. I didn't know when I'd be able to go back outside, visit my friends, or just go back to the store. Any hope of Bible camp was slim at that point, and all of it amounted to nothing anyway, as they were all eventually canceled. It was really hard to deal with, and it's something that I've had to come to terms with, and I have done a lot better at just being able to process all of it. And my sadness and loneliness could only grow by the day as the lockdown dragged on and on, each day adding to my anger and frustration. But then things started to get better, and as it did, there it was. A ray of light, a way to help with the bitterness, depression, loneliness, and isolation and heartache of COVID-19. Jokes. I would tell jokes, and I am a huge jokester. Goofball, class clown, whatever you want to call me, that's what I am. And puns are my joke of choice. My dad taught me the art, and there is an art to a pun. Hush to everyone who just thought there's no such thing as a good pun. There is. And I had several pretty good ones. For a couple of months, every day, I would post a pun on Facebook. A few of them were, if a cow can't give milk, is it a milk dud or an utter failure? It's all in the delivery. Or what's really uplifting? An elevator, or a joke like, a man went to a beekeeper to buy 12 bees, and the beekeeper gave him 13. When the man said he only wanted 12, the beekeeper said, oh, that's a freebie. They're so stupid, but little Facebook posts like that did wonders. And I like to believe that it really helped people, and I know it helped me. I love people, being with them. And I always want to be that person that they can count on to always make their day, I like to be that kind of person that can bring a smile to their face or create laughter or somehow brightening their day. COVID took that away, and that's one of the reasons why the lockdown was so hard, why it hurt so much, and it really did hurt. But it showed me that while my house might be my physical home, I've got an emotional and social home too. It's with my friends. Wherever my friends are, that's one of the places I'm most comfortable with. Because, I'm the epitome of a social butterfly. And COVID ripped that piece of my home away. And for a long while, I let that loneliness take over. It was too much for me to bear to be separated from my friends, to be in my house, but not really home. Now that things are getting better, I've come to terms with a lot of it. And now that things are getting better, I've taken advantage of any opportunity I can get to socialize with my friends. Any excuse I get, I'll take it. The jokes have stuck around. And my personal calling has always been to be an entertainer. Smile here, grin there, horrible pun way over there. Just little things like that. I've always enjoyed it too. And one thing that I've always wanted is to be that person that can be encouraging, to make the sun shine a little brighter for that person. I lost sight of that for a little while, but I've reclaimed it now. One bad pun at a time.
One of our professors got so fed up with us because he couldn't hear us through the mask that he made us all stop what we were doing and start theater exercises. This was in chemistry class.
I can confirm that out of all the things that have been canceled, 8 a.m. classes are not one of them.
I am a theater kid. I love theater. I love everything about it. So much so that it's going to be my career. The stage is where I feel like I belong, where I find my sense of community. It's like home to me. So you can imagine how excited I was when my school decided to produce The Wizard of Oz my senior year of high school. Hosting a production of that size was a big deal. Not only were there all the typical things to consider, like singing and dancing, a show like that required a hefty budget. Now, Dorothy may be the main character, but in my opinion, the best character is the Wicked Witch, although I might be biased, because that was the role I was cast in. I was ecstatic to play the role as the Wicked Witch, perfecting my performance through weeks of rehearsal. Now, I had heard about the coronavirus in China and that it was seeping into the United States, but I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, the modern world has developed amazing medicines and treatments. Surely this wouldn't be that big of a deal. However, that's not how the story went. I remember one day my principal walked into class and announced that tomorrow would be the last school day before the shutdown, and we should prepare to pack up our things. Corona had reached Baltimore and could begin to spread like wildfire at any moment. While the rest of the kids in the hallways were celebrating the idea of a pandemic vacation, the theater kids were mourning and weeping. We were just 2 weeks away from our show, and now it was canceled. Rehearsal still happened after school, but all we could see was a solemn, empty auditorium without an audience to be entertained. We were rehearsing the Munchkinland scene where the witch first appears to swear revenge on the hero, but it was difficult for actors and crew alike to stay productive. Many people were crying. I remember I wept bitterly behind the set while my friend who played Glinda held me in her arms, during a time when that kind of contact was still okay. It just wasn't fair. I couldn't see my friends tomorrow, and it certainly wasn't fair that we all couldn't get the happily ever after we had all wanted. None of it was fair. My dream of acting and inspiring others was being crushed by a pandemic completely out of my control. What was the point? I mean, sure, this kind of thing happened in Shakespeare's time, but not anymore. Nothing closed the theater. Our whole mantra is the show must go on, but it wouldn't. It couldn't. What was the point of performing without an audience to entertain? It all felt hopeless. But then, my director did something that nobody expected. After rehearsing the Munchkinland scene a few more times than usual, we'd noticed that there were people waiting outside the entrance doors. It turned out that our director had invited the elementary school parents to come watch us perform our scene. It was just the one scene, but we had an audience. There's still sadness over what could have been if the pandemic had just waited 2 more weeks, but we had our opening and closing night all rolled out into one. We had to make it count. As the Munchkins sang, Dorothy and Glinda blissfully watching, unaware of the angry witch about to appear, I waited for my cue behind the platform, still in tears. This was my one chance, and I couldn't pull it together. You can't have a crying witch, but the tears just wouldn't stop. Then suddenly I felt this strong urge. It felt like God was telling me, you need to give it your all. So I composed myself, wiping away both tears with both arms, and leapt onto the stage, roaring with the most menacing, vicious, evil laugh a witch could ever muster. I mean, even I was surprised at how menacing I sounded. And that was our best performance. I certainly thought it was my best performance. Months later, my castmates would tell me over social media just how much I had amazed and inspired them. Thinking back on the experience, it looked as though I had never cried on stage, and my cast members no longer saw the shy, quiet, self-reciting lines I spoke. I had become the witch that was truly wicked. Maybe only that small audience got to see my creation. Maybe COVID canceled our play. But it hasn't canceled theater or art or performance. The world has discovered virtual choirs, Zoom productions, dramatic readings, and so many other forms of performance to keep the arts alive. Sure, it takes some thinking outside the box to make art during a pandemic, but being creative, That's what theater kids do best.
Mm-hmm.